It's big, it's fast, and for a few more weeks, the V400 is the flagship printer from FLSUN. Yes, FLSUN did announce the S1 and T1 printers late last year, and they are releasing imminently. But just because something newer comes out doesn't mean that existing products are any less good. With that in mind, I'm reviewing the V400 3D printer from FLSUN. The V400 is a delta printer, which means that the print bed remains stationary, while the print head is moved by a tripod system of linkages, quite reminiscent of some simulator motion systems. The V400 has a claimed printing speed of 600mm per second, which sounds pretty fast until you hear that the upcoming S1 and T1 can print at 1200 and 1000mm per second respectively, which are astronomical. The V400 was originally priced at 1,399 Australian dollars, but ahead of the launch of the new printers, FLSUN has slashed the price to $929. And I've recently worked with my local distributor, 3D Printing Perth, for a discount code on their website to get the V400 at $915. 3D Printing Perth are a store local to me in Perth, Australia, and in their Yokind store, they stock printers, filaments, and spare parts, and a big thank you to them for loaning me this V400 for review today. It's definitely in a different league to printers I've used in the past, so I'm looking forward to putting it through its paces and showing you guys in this review. I'm going to cover things like assembly and user experience a bit later in the video. I want to start in the juicy part, which is the performance. So to help me along, I have my own personal printers for reference, and this is the Elegoo Neptune 4 and a Bambu Lab A1 Mini. And these are what I would call budget printers, so they're not direct competitors with the V400, but importantly, they are considered fast printers. So for reference, a regular 3D printer would print at about 60mm per second. These two print at 250, and the V400 is claiming 600. So that gives you a little bit of a frame of reference for how fast the V400 should be. Now, with both of my printers, the reason they top out at 250mm per second is because of their build. So with the Elegoo, the drivetrain actually struggles and makes terrible sounds anytime you move it faster than 300mm per second. And with the Bambu A1 Mini, it actually has a very, very stout drivetrain, but the build is quite lightweight. And as you print at high speeds, it actually shakes and hops around the table, and it also throws prints off of the bed as a result. So again, I limit that at 250 to keep the printing usable. By contrast, the V400 has a very solid build and a nimble movement system. So the claimed 600mm per second print speed, I think, sounds reasonable. I used a few different filaments for my testing, some that I purchased myself, but also my friends at Oz FDM were very kind to send me some samples to test, which I really appreciated. The first thing I did was calibrate my filaments using Orcaslice's inbuilt tools, and let's have a look at how the printers and filaments did. Let's start with my printers, the Neptune 4 and the A1 Mini. They both have pretty good hot ends, which are a good match to their mechanical ability, with the A1 Mini generally being 7 to 15% stronger than the Neptune 4. With PETG, we see a bit less flow than the PLA, the new generation Oz FDM and Landu PETGs flowing quite well, and the old faithful eSun flowing the least out of them all. Again, the A1 Mini generally outflowing the Neptune 4 a little bit. Now let's put the V400 in the mix. With the two PLAs, we see another step up in flow, with the Oz FDM topping out at 34mm³ per second, which should be good for 425mm per second printing. Things get really interesting when we start putting PETG into the V400. I don't know what it is, but the V400 just flies with PETG, with the Oz FDM PETG leading the pack at 40mm³ per second, which is theoretically able to print at 500mm per second. And the eSun, which had the least flow on all of my printers, is somehow able to flow at 37mm³ per second on the V400, which is quite respectable. The flow testing shows that the standard hot end on the V400 is very capable and a big step up from what I have on my printers. And as luck would have it, I did need 4 identical brackets like this, and I chose the Oz FDM PETG because it maxed out at a theoretical print speed of 500mm per second. So I went ahead and printed 4 of these, one each at 125, 250, 375, and 500mm per second. The 125mm per second sample is pretty much perfect and completed in 7 hours. Not much else to look at here. The 250mm sample printed pretty well. Ignore the fact that it failed, that's my fault. I hadn't washed the print bed in about 20 prints, so I was just getting a bit cocky. This printed pretty well, but took about the same 7 hours as the first sample. It turns out that the V400 is really slow at gyroid infill and really prefers to print straight lines, so I switched to rectilinear infill for the next two. The 375mm per second sample took just 2 hours and 7 minutes, which is over 5 hours faster than the first bracket, and I would say that the quality is acceptable. The ringing is more pronounced, you can actually feel the ripples under your finger, and we start to see some wall layer separation on the top layer, which we don't see on the slower samples. And the 500mm sample again is acceptable for its purpose, but there are definite print defects in the walls. Also, we see the same wall separation on the top layer as we did with the 375mm sample. And you probably noticed that this bracket is bicolored. The filament sensor tripped mid-print and resumed smoothly after I loaded a new roll. So based on these 4 samples, which are printed at 100% of what the hot end can flow right down to 25%. We do see a little bit of a step in quality. The 250mm, despite the fact that it didn't finish, is actually really nice quality. The 375 is very usable with some little defects if you're very fussy. That being said, if you're in a rush and you want to print at 500mm per second, the results are definitely acceptable, so long as you understand that there will be some defects here and there. Let's switch gears now and look at fine detail reproduction with this little figurine of Ganesh. If we have a look at the 3 figurines, we'll see that there's generally pretty good detail on all 3 of them. The A1 Mini I think definitely wins in terms of the surface detail. The A1 Mini reproduces that quite smoothly, but there's definitely some layer lines that are standing out, particularly on the V400. And I do want to bring attention to the left ear because the V400 was able to reproduce the entire ear very nicely, but for some reason both of the bed slingers were not able to get the bottom of the ear started until about a quarter of the way up. Next up, we have this handle that I designed for my DJI RS3 Mini gimbal. So with my printers, I'm quite confident that if I turn the speed right down, these would work quite well. But interestingly, they both presented with quite severe layer shifts. So these were both printed at 250mm per second, and neither of these on the A1 Mini or the Neptune 4 I would call acceptable. And also if we look at the front overhang, we can see that neither of those printers are able to adequately cool the PLA, so the overhang detail is quite unpleasant. Now these took 5 hours to print, and on the V400, we got this one to print in 2 hours and 20 minutes. So that was about half the time, which is really impressive. And we can see that the major success is that it actually got the handle to bridge correctly. And I think that the stability of having the print bed immobile versus the bed slingers that sling the print back and forth the entire time is really showing here. So for some of these really challenging prints, I do think that the Delta design is a big advantage over bed slingers. If we look at the overhang performance of the V400, none of these 3 printers have adequate cooling to print this PLA at these speeds. And this is a regular PLA. It's not a high speed PLA. With regular PLA, it can melt really fast, but the cooling I think is going to be the limiting factor, especially for items that have quite steep overhangs. And so I thought, what about PETG? We can see that the V400 has really good melt performance with PETG, and we also know that PETG doesn't need the amount of cooling that PLA does. This printed in 2 hours and 40 minutes, so about half of what the bed slingers were doing at full speed, and this has really acceptable detail. Now we can see that with the Landu PETG, the optical properties of the PETG are affected a little bit by the fast printing, but this has totally acceptable overhang performance, and I'm really pleased with how this turned out. And this again goes to show that the V400 is a very capable fast printer with PETG, which was a real surprise to me. Let's talk about prototyping parts. What I have here is a file shared to me from my friends at German Motorworks. It is from an A90 Supra race car, and it's a bracket for an external reservoir for the rear coilover suspension. And I printed these out at 100% of what the printers are capable. So the Neptune 4 and the A1 Mini were printed at 250mm per second, and the V400 printed at 400. And both of my printers finished the bracket in 1 hour and 20 minutes. The V400 finished it in 54 minutes, so that's 30% quicker. If we look at the surface finish of my own printers, the surface finish actually looks pretty nice. If we look at the surface finish from the V400 sample, it's really quite broken, and this is a consequence of running the printer at 100% speed. It was actually ripping up the infill as it printed, and although this would serve perfectly well as a prototype for checking fit and so on, it just goes to show that running the printer at 100% of its potential may not be the way to go. And so what I did was I actually reprinted this in the Lando PETG, and this was slowed down just a smidge here and there, and it completed in 56 minutes. So still about a 29% time saving against the other printers, but with a much more acceptable surface finish. And it goes to show that there are definitely some parameters that you can tune that don't cost you a lot of time, but definitely increase the quality. Now about build volume. So I've printed out 3 vases on the 3 printers that I introduced before. These are all from the Oz FDM filament range, and I think they all look pretty cool. But interestingly, none of the printers that I have on hand are able to print to the very top of the advertised build volume. They all throw errors showing that the print is moving out of bounds. And we can see that with the A1 Mini, it's living up to its name. It's actually quite small, and I definitely have encountered times where I just haven't been able to fit items that I want to print on the A1 Mini. The Neptune 4 is definitely a step up, and I've generally found that this build volume is very versatile, and I've found that most things that I want to print, I can on the Neptune 4. But when we look at the V400, we have quite a large build volume there, very versatile. But interestingly, FLSUN advertised the build volume of the V400 as a 300 diameter, 410mm high volume, but it's not a pure cylinder. If we have a look at the delta movement mechanism, from the home position, the print head cannot move straight laterally without moving downwards. So the print volume on the V400 is actually pencil shaped. And if my math is right, we can print a cylinder of 300 by 354mm high, and the remaining 56mm at the top is shaped like a cone, hence the pencil shape. So if you do want to print something right to the very top of that 410mm allowance, you're going to want something that's bang in the center of your print plate, something like an Eiffel Tower. Nonetheless, the 3 vases here definitely do highlight that the V400's larger build volume gives you more options if you do want to print something large. Let's talk production 3D printing. So if you're in the business of mass manufacturing parts, whether to use yourself or to sell, then you're generally going to want to make the most amount of parts with as little amount of input as possible. And the way I see it, there's 3 ways that you can increase your throughput. One is to turn up the speed. So just print your prints faster. Now, the potential downside of going fast is that you may actually reduce print quality, and also you can increase the likelihood of print errors that could compromise your entire run of prints. The second way would be to print more items per job, and that means that a larger print bed that can fit more units is going to be beneficial. Now, the risk of printing too many items in the one print bed is that if one fails, there is the chance that it actually has like a domino effect and ruins the entire job. So if you have 10 versus 30 items on a print bed, if you lose 10, it's not as big of a hit as losing 30. And the final way is to actually have more printers going. And so with that, you can actually keep your speed moderate, your number of items per job moderate, but you can still increase your throughput. Anyways, so we have at the moment a batch of little cable management clips that I'm printing on all 3 printers. We're doing the exact same job, so it's 10 of the printers for each of these, and they have all started at the same time. And so at this point, we can see that the V400 is visibly ahead from the other 2 printers. My printers are going to finish this job in about 2.5 hours, the V400 in 1.5. So just by print speed alone, the V400 is increasing throughput by about 40%, and all of these printers are actually running below their maximum. I did want to tune them down a little bit to get a little bit more reliability in terms of quality as well as completing the jobs. So if we think about adding a second printer instead of printing faster, you'll be printing at the same speed, but you can double your throughput. And so that's actually going to be a reduction in total print time of 50%. And so I personally feel that for mass production, adding more printers rather than printing faster is probably going to make a bit more sense, unless of course you're printing something that needs the extra volume that the V400 offers. I think the V400's strengths lie in fast one-off prints. I think in the context of a print farm that's just cranking out job after job after job, you may be better off with some smaller printers but having multiple. Especially considering how much space the V400 does take up. It's roughly double the size of either of these printers. And so I think that in terms of a print farm environment, the V400 may not have the same kind of strengths as something a little bit more compact. Overall, the print performance of the V400 is very good, and the build volume is very versatile. You could build something as big as this vase or as little as this figurine, and even though I found the A1 Mini to be just a little bit better in the fine detail reproduction, if you handed me just this one figurine, I'd be more than happy with its performance. And also, the V400 was able to print at between 25 to 40% faster than my printers, which are already considered fast. And from a print performance perspective, I'm very happy with the V400. Let's look at some of the features of the V400. It has very solid aluminium profile construction, carbon fiber rods, and an all-metal hot end that can print up to 600 millimeters per second if your filament can keep up. I only have regular filament, but I was still able to print at up to 500 millimeters per second. The belts that control the movement are 10 millimeters wide, which is a really nice premium spec. And the hot end can reach 300 degrees Celsius and the heat bed 110 degrees Celsius, both of which surpass what is typically found at this price point. The print surface is a spring steel PEI coated sheet, which is very, very nice to use, but there are no indexing tabs to guide the positioning of the print sheet, so it always takes a couple of goes to get it in the right spot. The control pad has a 7-inch IPS touchscreen, which is very nice to use and has all the creature comforts, Wi-Fi, filament runout detection, and power loss recovery as well. A pretty comprehensive feature list, so what's the user experience like? The V400 does require some assembly, but despite its size and apparent complexity, I was able to get this assembled in 45 minutes, which is exactly how long it took me to set up my much smaller Neptune 4. It's definitely helped that a lot of the hard stuff is actually done in the factory, like the installation of the motors and the belts inside the aluminium profiles. So all you do is bolt the rig together and plug in the electronic connectors. The instructions are okay, they were enough for me to slowly make my way along, but I do think FLSUN could have done a better job showing you exactly where the connectors are that you're expected to plug cables into. Loading filament is pretty straightforward, even though it sometimes takes a couple of goes to get through the filament runout detector. But the hot end is really easy to use. Just set the temperature of the hot end in the touchscreen and then push the filament in or pull it out if you're unloading. To this day, I haven't touched the print head assembly at all. The most I've done is push filament in or take filament out. The touchscreen is really nice to use, but I will say that compared to the 4-inch display that's on my Neptune 4, I don't really feel that a 7-inch screen gives you much extra, aside from a more premium feeling. The Wi-Fi works really well, and I was able to plug in just a regular USB webcam, and that was up and running in 15 seconds. Sending print jobs via the network was really straightforward, but you can also load prints the old-fashioned way via USB into the control pad there. A couple of things though, you can't hot swap USB drives because the V400 won't recognize drives that it didn't boot up with. And another one is that a couple of times when I was printing items from the USB drive, the V400 would get the first couple of layers down and then just stop and forget that it was printing anything in the first place. And this is something I never experienced when sending jobs over the network. Now, I will say that I haven't updated the software on the V400 at all, and the V400 tells me that there's 182 packages that it wants to update. I'm someone who's very cautious about updating software, and the V400 straight out of the box works well enough that I am quite happy to leave it be. That being said, there is a possibility that what I've complained about has already been fixed in software updates that have been released already. Also, the V400 comes with this awkward little stand for the screen, which even now I don't really understand how to use. No matter how I fold it, it just doesn't sit comfortably on the stand. So I designed and printed this mount for the screen. Overall, I really like the V400, but we do need to talk about the elephant in the room, which is its size. So being a Delta printer, there is a necessary height to the movement mechanism, plus the thickness of these rather large aluminium profiles, and again, the thickness of the top and bottom of the printer. And overall, you have a printer that takes up quite a bit of space. It's also unenclosed, so it can get a little bit smelly, especially because it's so fast at melting filament. If you want to enclose the printer, you can buy an enclosure kit from FLSUN. There's also designs on Thingiverse for you to DIY if that's more of your style. So then, with the newest FLSUN printers releasing in a matter of weeks, is the V400 still a good purchase? I think with the recently reduced price, yes. It's fast, reliable, easy to use, and versatile with such a large build volume. Pricing for the T1 and S1 went live today as I'm filming this. The T1 is priced at 999 Australian dollars and the S1 2,499 Australian dollars. So the T1 is just a little bit less than $100 more than the V400. If you don't need the build volume of the V400, I think the T1 is the one to buy because it's even faster than the V400, it's enclosed, and it also has the inbuilt camera with AI functionality. But if you want the freedom to print items larger than can fit in the T1, I think the V400 is a very compelling option and worth your consideration. Just reminding any Aussies watching that you can get the V400 from 3D Printing Perth for $915 using my discount code QUANV400. And actually, this lightly used review unit will be available for even less than that. Just give 3D Printing Perth a phone call and tell them you want this one. So that wraps up my review of the FLSUN V400. So those of you who've been following my channel from the beginning would know that I only got into 3D printing not that long ago, and I'm really grateful to 3D Printing Perth for working with me and providing me this printer to play with, because it's really broadened my horizons a little bit, and I'm really excited about some of the projects that I'll be able to do with the larger build volume of printers like this. But also I'm hoping that the new printers that are releasing soon, I'll be able to do some content on as well. So we are working on something behind the scenes. Make sure you like and subscribe to see that content. So that's it from me. The next videos that are releasing are going to be back to my usual sim racing related content, but I'm definitely interested at the opportunities that are available in terms of 3D printing or possibly even other equipment as well. So make sure you like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks guys.